The grim grey rocks of prison walls had finally sprung a leak, but only the greatest of gangdom's chiefs could taste the fresh air outside. Crime! With its many bloody fingers, crime, with a single master. Who was the man behind these prison breaks, who fed the fat keepers of hell and laughed at the law? Satan came up with an answer, while the hot guns spoke of death, and the law held up its hands. The Tommy gun spoke its peace. Chapter 1. Only the rich die. The rays of the afternoon sun crimsoned the great studio window and threw a checkerboard pattern over the luxurious penthouse living room. In a large easy chair, a dark, sleek-haired, impeccably dressed man stirred and shaded his gray eyes with a gesture of irritation. "Damn it," he said in a low voice. "I've been sitting here doing nothing for 3 hours." From beyond the rare Chinese screen at the end of the room came a discreet, almost inaudible answer. 3 months, Mr. Adair." Carrie Adair turned his head sharply, the sun etching his clean-cut features cleanly, emphasizing the strong chin, the chiseled nose, the slanting forehead of the man. "What's that? What did you say, Jeremy?" "I said..." The voice behind the screen materialized, became a spare, somberly dressed individual whose serene face was contradicted by his wide, humorous mouth, aquiline nose, high, intelligent forehead, long jaw, unfathomable eyes. All these were in strange contrast to that wide, mobile mouth. But most remarkable of all were the long, thin, sensitive hands that the man raised in a motion of explanation when he answered Carrie Adair's question. "I said, Mr. Adair, it's been 3 months, not 3 hours. Carrie Adair grunted and came out of his chair with surprising agility for a seemingly indolent man. A man who was the very model of the rich, bored man about town, a man who had gentlemen and clubmen draped in every line of his faultlessly cut dark suit, whose gleaming shoes reflected disuse and idleness, whose strong, well-kept hands bespoke a body without a soul, a sword without an edge. He strode across the window and stared down at the sparkling panorama. "Make me a highball, Jeremy. Light." Below him also, but hidden from view by the wide terrace that circled the penthouse apartment, were the teeming streets of New York's financial district. It was a whim that had led Adair to build his home atop one of New York's business skyscrapers, and the fact that he'd had to buy the building to do it hadn't deterred him. His manservant, who filled the offices of valet, chauffeur, and butler with rare competence, was coming towards him with a tall amber-colored glass on a silver tray when the tinkle of a musical gong struck gently through the silence. "The private house phone, sir," Jeremy murmured as he presented the drink. Adair nodded absently as he raised the glass to his lips. "I'm not in, Jeremy." "Yes, sir. I mean, no, sir." Jeremy set the empty tray on a priceless table and glided noiselessly across the rich Turkish rug. He lifted one of the 2 telephones in the room. "Mr. Adair's residence," he said in a flat mechanical tone. Then a moment later, "Indeed, Mr. Adair is in. Won't you come right up, sir?" Adair turned from the window with irritation hardening his eyes to an opaque gray. "What the devil, Jeremy? I told you." "Mr. Desher, sir," Jeremy explained briefly. "Oh." Joe Desher, chief agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, was sole possessor of the open sesame that swung the portals of Adair's home inward at any time. Well, almost any time. Adair drained his drink. His face was perceptibly lightened when he passed the empty glass to Jeremy. The eyes of these 2 men, master and servant, met in a long look of query and speculation. Jeremy stood for 5 seconds after a second gong sounded throughout the still room, a deeper, more vibrant bong than the first one. Then a lazy smile broke across Adair's good-looking features. "Don't keep Mr. Desher waiting, Jeremy," Adair murmured. The tall, morose butler fought back the ripple of mirth and excitement that played across his mouth. He went to the door with a swiftness that was surprising. Adair stood with his back to the window, his hands thrust into the pockets of his jacket. You could hear Jeremy's, "How are you, sir?" and Desher's rumbled, Okay, Jeremy, how are you? Busy as ever with your do-nothing boss." And the servant's murmured answer, "Not quite as busy as, at some other times. Your hat and coat, sir. Thank you." And the next moment, the portieres of the room were thrown aside as by a stormy wind when the dynamic chief of the FBI swept through them. "Hi, Carey." "How are you, Joe? Good to see you again." Desher, squat, powerful, dark, round of head, and with a gleaming, honest light in his brown eyes, stuck out a pudgy hand to grip and shake that of the rangy, debonair, graceful Carey Adair. It was a strange friendship that existed between these two, but a friendship that was sincere nevertheless. Meeting casually some 9 years previous, Desher had formed the habit of dropping in on Adair from time to discuss some particularly puzzling case on which he was working. Desher flattered himself that he brought the breath of adventure and excitement into the life of his apparently indolent friend. Silent for the most part during Desher's problems. An occasional question on Adair's part would serve to clarify some point for the investigator, bring to his eyes a gleam of grudging admiration that one so idle could be so incisive, and could think so clearly. Adair waved to a chair with a lazy gesture. "Bark the frame, Joe. Sit and have a bit of a drink with me." He nodded in Jeremy's direction without looking away. "In the big city for long?" Desher seemed uncertain. "Yes and no. I don't know. All depends." He sought a chair, his eyes taking in the rich furnishings of the place with combined envy and derision. "Pretty soft for you, Carey, all this." His hands made rising spirals at the magnificence of the surroundings. "All this, and not a drop of work or effort to show for it." Adair smiled lazily, but he didn't answer until Jeremy had served the drinks. He sipped slowly, then, "We can't all be swashbuckling adventurers, Joe. It takes all kinds to make a world, you know. The rich and the poor, the idlers and the workers, the criminals and the sleuths. By the way, Joe, how's the detecting business going?" A frown crossed the serious face of the FBI chief. He guzzled at his drink eagerly, then set the half-empty glass on the table at his side. "That's what I'm up to see you about, Carey. Something's doing." Adair's eyebrows went up. He averted his eyes as if to hide the excitement that had sprung alive in them. "I don't think you came all this distance from Washington to see me." "Not altogether," Desher admitted. "Got to see my local agents about a death." He paused, his eyes curious. "It's funny how often talking to you clears up my mind on cases, Carey. Like, well, we might as well be frank about it, like that job that faced us 3 months ago." Adair nodded. "Yes, I remember you telling me about it the last time you were here, but Joe," his voice was gently joshing, "didn't you tell me that your mythical Captain Satan cleared that up for you, and left you with the credit and glory and a raise?" Desher grunted. "Yeah, but look here, Carey, don't go calling that human devil Satan a myth. It's true, not many people know of him. Fewer yet have seen him. The underworld knows of him as a freebooter, a pirate who preys on their big shots and wrecks them after he gets their swag. The law knows him as a freebooter who beats the law itself to the punch." Adair mused. "But he's not a criminal, Joe." Desher shook his head emphatically. "A one-man police force who makes monkeys of us and takes his pay from the crooks he smashes, but still, it isn't good. He brings the police and the federal men into contempt, and he isn't legally empowered to do the things he does." Desher reached for his drink. The table at his side was empty. He blinked, looked to his left, and stared down at the floor on either side of his chair. "What the—" Adair leaned forward solicitously. "Something wrong, Joe?" "My drink. I didn't finish it, did I?" Jeremy coughed discreetly. "Isn't this your glass, sir?" Desher turned, looked to where Jeremy was pointing. On a small table, directly next to him, stood the half-filled goblet. "Where did that come from?" Scotland, sir, Jeremy murmured. The best imported whiskey, sir. No, no, I don't mean the whiskey, I mean the glass. Tiffany's, sir. They have admirable crystalware, sir. Skip it. Skip it. Deshare growled. Damned if it was there a moment ago. He drained the drink and passed the glass back to Jeremy. Funny. Every time I come here, I seem to lose my memory. Ooh. His eyes drifted back to Adair. Where was I? What were we talking about? About your mythical Captain Satan, Adair reminded him. His eyes flashed a look of half amusement, half reproof at Jeremy. That will be all for now, he told the servant. Oh, yes. The sheriff sat forward in his chair, all interest again. I tell you, Carrie, Satan isn't mythical. He's real flesh and blood. He's not a newspaper character, I grant you. We can't afford to let word of his activities become widespread, and the average man on the street would hardly believe the story, even if he were to hear it. Adair interrupted. Well, Joe, you should know about him. You say yourself he has saved your life more than once, and certainly he seems to have been more of a help than hindrance to you. What's your complaint? Damn it! Desher exploded. What do you expect us to do? Sit by and twiddle our thumbs while Satan does our work and laughs at us? Adair shrugged. Find the man. If he annoys you so, find him and put him out of mischief. You must suspect that you know him at times. It isn't possible that you've seen him face to face and still don't know who he is. The few times I've seen him at close contact, he's been masked. Desher excused himself. Or at night, in a poor light, he was unrecognizable anyway. He stopped, his face breaking into a delighted smile. You'd be surprised if I told you the man I suspect him to be. On one occasion... Adair shook his head slowly. Who? One of your own men? The sheriff's eyes roved over the elegant living room, and he chuckled audibly. No, not one of my own men, Carrie. Who then? The sheriff waved his hand negligently, the smile still on his face, but it vanished slowly with his next words. Never mind that part of it, Carrie. It was too ridiculous. Let me tell you instead what I'm here about this time. Adair spoke without raising his voice. 2 more drinks, Jeremy. He smiled apologetically to Disher. I'm a better listener with a glass in my hand, Joe. Care for a cigar with it? Disher nodded as Jeremy slid into the room with 2 more glasses. He felt in his pocket for a cigar, frowned suddenly. Now where the devil... Your cigar, sir? Your cigar, sir, Jeremy murmured as he set the drinks down. You put them in your hat when you came in, sir. What? Why, that's nonsense. I put cigars into my hat. What? Do you think I'm crazy? I can't discuss that, sir, in my position, Jeremy murmured as he vanished through the portieres into the foyer. He was back in a moment with the chair's fedora, proffering it to the man. There, resting on and strongly contrasting with the blazed orange lining of the hat, there was an even half-dozen of wicked-looking black cigars. Adair stared down into his drink when Desher's mouth fell open in astonishment and his eyes bulged. The FBI man rescued his cigars and jammed them back into his pocket, keeping one out. He bit the head off it savagely and jumped when Jeremy flashed a flaming match for his light. This place is haunted, Desher growled as he puffed the smoke alive. When he had the thing going and it exhaled several clouds of gray-blue smoke, the sheriff crossed his stumpy legs and settled deeper into his chair. It's nothing we can put our fingers on, Carrie, he began. Just a routine checkup, but a strange thing has been happening to some noted criminals of late. Especially federal criminals, men who have been convicted by federal prosecutors for crimes against the government, kidnappers, counterfeiters, smugglers, and the like. Adair nodded and sipped at his drink, but he didn't interrupt. The sheriff continued, Well, some of these men have been dying in jail under peculiar circumstances. Adair frowned and sat forward. Let me get this, Joe. You are investigating the fact that some of the country's most notorious criminals are dying, but. I know, Desher cut in. What do we care? Well, for one thing, we keep a pretty close eyes on our big prisoners. For another, if it's possible that these men are being wiped out in jail by someone who fears that they might squeal, for instance, or that they still have a grip on their particular portion of the underworld, we want to know that too. The circumstances? Adair asked tersely. The notorious Sam Clammy, Desher recited, killed in an explosion, practically unrecognizable. He was working at a machine in the jail shoe shop. In some way, the machine he was operating exploded. Adair nodded. Clammy had plenty of money, I understand. Who's next? Joe Mickle, the counterfeiter. And there was a boy who had the rock salted away, worth $1 million at least. Mickle was literally cut to ribbons, his face, anyway, in a prisoner's riot. The sheriff paused. Then, Siggy Murrah, the king of smugglers, as they called him. He was working as a trustee in a prison hospital and in some way had his face horribly burned by ether. He died almost instantly. Adair sat forward, his eyes narrowing and gleaming. How was the identification made, Joe, if their faces were all badly damaged? Desher puffed his waning cigar for a moment and waved a deprecating hand. Forget that, Carey, he said flatly. They were the right men. We checked them through the best of possible checks. Fingerprints being impossible or other identification missing, we checked them through their teeth. Their dental work tallied exactly with our records. Adair sat back, the light dying from his eyes. He thought for a long moment. I read that Denver Phil Gilkane, the dope ringleader, was just plain sprung. That right? Desher nodded. Yep, out of Atlanta Penitentiary. No death there. Why do you ask? Just wondered. The two sat in silence for a long time. Desher was the first to break it. Siggy Murrah died 2 days ago. He grinned mirthlessly. Burton Murnell can't be shedding any tears over that. Adair's eyes asked an unspoken question as he reached for a cigarette. He lighted it and sat back again. Burton Murnell is the greatest prosecutor of our time, Desher recited a fact that they both knew. When Murrah went to jail, he swore he would get out and kill Murnell. Screamed it in court, told it to the reporters when he went through the gates, yelled it down the cell blocks every night. Of course, the federal pen at Lewisburg, Pennsylvania isn't like some kid's bank that you could crack with a hammer. Still, it's liable to get a man nervous, that I'll get sprung and kill you talk. So Murnell can't be weeping anyway. Adair nodded and rested his head against the back of his chair, his eyes going shut. After a few minutes, Desher sat forward and stared keenly. Hey, you asleep? Adair opened his eyes and smiled slowly. No, not sleep, just thinking. Trying to hitch this thing up with... He paused and sat straight, reaching for his drink. After he had drained it, he said, Joe, there's something of a pattern in this thing. Do you get it? The sheriff shook his head, his eyes puzzled. Pattern? You mean a similarity? Sure, I see it. They're all prisoners. And they're men who were ringleaders. I told you that. Maybe, just maybe, mind. Their old outfits or competitors are trying to put them away, shut them up, and get them out of the way for good. Adair shook his head. I don't mean that, Joe. He smiled suddenly, a gleam of amusement in his eyes. Maybe Satan's doing it. He whispered in mock earnestness. Captain Satan. Cut the kidding, Desher growled. What is this pattern you're talking about? Adair sobered. Just this, he said slowly and distinctly. Each and every one of those men you mentioned, including the one who escaped, Denver Phil Gilkane, each and every one of them had something else in common, Joe. They were all rich. Still rich, despite the fact that they were in jail. Don't you see, Joe? Only the rich criminals have died. Chapter 2. The dead carry guns. We'll stop it there for today. Captain Satan, man. Love it. So good. Captain Satan.